Hello everyone, here is Afras Yab. Today we are going to solve Cambridge IGCSE Physics Paper 4 Theory Extended held on February-March 2018. Paper code is 0625 with variant 42. So let's start from question number 1. Question number 1. Define acceleration. Here we have to write the definition of acceleration. So acceleration is basically the rate of change of velocity of body. So I write here rate of change of velocity of body. Part B. Figure 1.1 shows the speed time axis for the graph of the motion of a car. So in figure 1.1 we can see that it's a speed time graph. In this graph, time is taken along x-axis and measured in second, while the speed is taken along y-axis and measured in meter per second. Part 1. The car starts from rest. From rest, it means that the initial velocity of the car is equal to 0. Car starts from 0 velocity. From time t is equal to 0 to time equal to 15 seconds. The car has a constant acceleration to a speed of 28 meter per second. So first of all, here we are given two things. In first part, when time t is equal to 0 and second time is, I consider it as t1 and it is t2, second time is 15 seconds. So first of all, initial velocity of body is equal to 0 because car is at rest. And second, its speed is 28 meter per second. So I write here Vf is equal to 28 meter per second. And we have to draw on the graph for constant acceleration. So going back on the graph, first of all, constant acceleration means uniform speed. It means uniform speed. So uniform speed means that body cover equal distance in equal interval of time. So first of all, here first point is t is equal to 0. It means that body starts from time t0 and second one is 15. It is at this point. We have label on the time axis. Now we have to label on the speed axis. Initial velocity is 0. It is also at the same point. While the final velocity is 28 meter per second. It will be at this point. And when we find out the locus of this point, it will be this one. So first of all, when we draw the constant acceleration graph for the speed time graph, it will be a straight line because the uniform speed. Now I am going to draw a curve. So this is basically the curve for constant acceleration from 0 to 15 seconds. In second part, from time 15 second to 32 second, the car has a constant speed of 28 meter per second. Here speed is constant. It means that the value of speed is not changing. It remains constant even the time passes. So first of all, here time is 15 seconds. I write here t1 is equal to 15 seconds and t2 is equal to 32 seconds. The car has a constant speed of 28, means that its speed is constant, it does not change. So this is 15 second and next is 32 at this point. It means that from this point to this point, that is 28 meter per second. So 28 is at this point. I have to join this and these 2 points. So it will be a straight line that is parallel to time axis. Third part, from time t is equal to 32 seconds, the car has a constant deceleration of 2.0 meter per second square until it comes to rest. So first of all, here we are given one time, that body starts from time 32 seconds. So t1 will be 32 seconds. And then it moves with constant deceleration. It means that it moves with negative acceleration. Or we can simply say that the speed of bodies decreases with the increase in time. And its value is 2 meter per second square, and then it comes to rest. So here first of all we have to find out the value of time at which the car comes to rest. For that I write a point. First of all, at 32 seconds, this point, the speed is 28 meter per second. So I make a point that 32 and 28, and second point is 32 is basically time and this is speed. Second time is not given, so I just write t and then body comes to rest, so that the speed of body is equal to 0. Then it will be 0. By using these 2 points, I have to find out the value of t. So when we find out the slope of the graph, because it's a speed time graph and the slope of speed time graph gives us acceleration, because we already defined that acceleration is the rate of change of velocity of the body. So I write here slope, that is acceleration. In this case it will be equal to v2 minus v1 over t2 minus t1. So acceleration is given 2.0 and it is deceleration, means that negative acceleration. So I write here it is minus 2.0. It will be equal to, this is v and this is also time. So 0 minus 28 divided by t minus 32. Now I am going to cross multiply this. So that the value of time comes to be minus 46 seconds. It is positive because this cancels by this. So time comes to be 46 seconds. So first of all I find 46 seconds. It is at this point. It means that when time t is equal to 45 seconds, the car comes to rest. So I have to join these points. Now I am going to join them. So this line basically shows the negative slope. Going towards the next part of this question. So here we have to do all of these calculation in this space. Part 2. From time 15 second to 32 second, the path of the car is part of a circle. From this motion state, first the direction of resultant force of the car. So here we have to describe the direction of the resultant force. So when a body is moving into the circular path, then as we know that the acceleration of body is directed towards the center of circle, so does the force, because according to second law of Newton, F is equal to ma. When force is in the direction of center of this circle, then the force will also be towards the center of this circle. So I write here, force will be directed towards the center of circle. Part 2. What happens to the velocity of car? So basically there are two things. First is speed and second one is velocity. In speed only magnitude involved, but velocity include both magnitude plus direction. That's why velocity is a vector quantity and speed is a scalar quantity. So here we can see that when a body moves into the circular path, speed remains same. It means that the magnitude of velocity remains same, but its direction changes at every point. So if I consider that body is at this point and it is moving anti-clockwise, and I have to find out the direction of velocity at this point. So I draw a tangent at this point. This shows the direction of velocity. So if I consider that body is at this point, its direction of motion will be just like this. That is the direction of velocity. So I write here, velocity is continuously changing its direction. Question number 2, part A. A force is used to move an object from the Earth's surface to greater height. Explain why the gravitational potential energy, that is GPE, of the object increases. So if I consider the object that is at the surface of Earth, it is the Earth, and the object is placed at the surface of this Earth, then we can see that the height of object is small. But if I lift this object at this point, then we can see that the height of this object from the surface of Earth is larger, and the gravitational potential energy of the body is related with the height. So in the question, the object is first of all at the surface of Earth, then it raises to a greater height. And when there is a greater height, then the potential energy will also be greater. I write here, gravitational potential energy is equal to mgh, where m is the mass, g is acceleration due to gravity, and h is height. When we increase the height, the gravitational potential energy also increases. That's why the gravitational potential energy of the object increases when we lift this object at a certain height. And also the gravitational potential energy is the work done by the force. So I write here, because gravitational potential energy is the work done by force, and formula of GPE is equal to mgh. Here h is height, and when h increases, so does the gravitational potential energy. And here h has increased. So gravitational potential energy increased. Part B. Figure 2.1 shows a train moving up towards the top of mountain. So this train is basically moving towards the top of the mountain. Train transport 80 passengers. Each of average mass is 65 kg. There are total 80 passengers and each one of them has the average mass of 65 kg through a vertical height of 1600 meter. Calculate the increase in the total gravitational potential energy of the passenger. Here we have to find out the total gravitational potential energy. So I write here again the formula of gravitational potential energy. It is equal to mgh, where m is the mass. So in the train there are total 80 passengers. Each of them has mass 65 kg. So the total mass will be the product of 80 and 65. I write here 80 multiplied by 65, that is the total mass, and the value of g is 10 and height is given 1600 meter. So that the value of gravitational potential energy comes to be 8.3 into 10 की power 7 joule. I write here increase in gravitational potential energy is equal to 8.3 into 10 की power 7 joule. Part C. The engine of the train has a power of 1500 kilowatt. The time taken to reach the top of mountain is 30 minutes. Calculate the efficiency of the engine in raising 80 passengers 1600 meter to the top of mountain. Here we have to find out the efficiency, and the formula of efficiency I write here. Efficiency is equal to output power divided by input power multiplied by 100. So first of all, here input power is 1500 kilowatt, that is the power of engine of the train, and output power is not given. We have to find out the output power, and this potential energy is basically the output energy, and time is given, that is 30 minutes. So using these values we can find out the power, because power is equal to rate of energy transfer E over T, energy per unit time. So energy is 8.3 into 10 की power 7 joule divided by time is given 30 minutes, and we have to convert this time into seconds. So I write here 30 multiplied by 60. So this time converts into second, so that the power comes to be 46000 joule. The unit of power is watt. Now we have input power and output power. By putting values in efficiency formula we can calculate it. So I write here E will be equal to 46222 divided by input power is this one 1500, and there is kilowatt. We have to convert this into watt. So I just multiply it with 1000 and multiply it with 100, so that the efficiency comes to be 3.1%. I write here efficiency is equal to 3.1%. Question number 3, part A. Complete the statement by writing in the blank spaces. The moment of force about a point is equal to dash multiplied by dash. So here we have to write the definition of moment of force. So moment of force is basically the product of force and perpendicular distance from the pivot point. So I write here the moment of force about a pivot is equal to the force multiplied by its perpendicular distance from pivot. Part B. Figure 3.1 shows a horizontal rod of length 2.5 meter and weight 160 Newton. The weight of rod acts at its center. The rod is suspended by two vertical ropes X and Y. The tension in each of the rope is 80 Newton. So here is a figure 3.1. The weight of this horizontal rod is acting in downward direction and it is equal to 160 Newton. And there are two ropes X and Y and it is 80 Newton and 80 Newton. Part 1. State the name given to the point at which the weight of the rod acts. So we have to take the name of this point at which the weight of this rod acts. So this point is basically the center of mass. Center of mass is a point at which all the weight of the body acts. So I write here it is center of mass. Part 2. Calculate the mass of rod. Here we have to calculate the mass of rod. So going back to the figure, we can see that the weight of this rod is 160 Newton and it is acting in downward direction. So I write here weight is equal to 160 Newton. Second, here we have to find out the value of mass. So weight is the product of mass and acceleration due to gravity. When we find out mass, it comes to be W over G and weight is given 160 Newton and the value of G is 10 meter per second square. So I write here 10, it becomes 16. So the mass of this rod comes to be 16 kilogram. I write here 16 kilogram. Part 3. The rod is equilibrium. Using data from figure 3.1, explain why. So going back to the figure 3.1, we can see that the weight of this rod is acting downward and its magnitude is 160 Newton. There are two ropes X and Y and their tension is 80 Newton and 80 Newton. So first of all, when we calculate the total forces that acting in upward direction and in downward direction, so that F of up, that is upward forces, will be equal to F of down, that is downward forces. Here two forces are acting in upward direction, that is this one and this one. It is 80 Newton and second one is also 80. It will be equal to 160 is acting in downward direction. So that 160 Newton will be equal to 160 Newton, and when we find out the resultant force, so the resultant force will be the difference of upward forces and downward forces, so that it comes to be 0. First condition is that the sum of all the forces acting on this is equal to 0 because the upward forces is equal to downward forces. So I write here, due to the upward and downward forces, being equal in magnitude, There is no resultant force. This is first condition, and second is that the total clockwise movement will be equal to the total anti-clockwise movement. So first of all, if you consider the rope X, and the tension in this rope is 80, and the distance from the center is almost 1.2 meter. Also from this point to this point, that is rho pi, the distance is 1.2 meter. So when we calculate the movement will be the product of force and its perpendicular distance. So when I calculate the moment for the rope X, it will be 80 multiplied by 1.2, and it comes to be 96. When I calculate for rope phi, it will also 80 multiplied by 1.2, and it is equal to 96. So we can simply say that the moment on both sides are equal, that is the clockwise movement will be equal to anti-clockwise movement. So I write here, also no resultant movement about any point. Due to clockwise movement is equal to anti-clockwise movement. So this is in equilibrium. I also calculate here moment, that is 80 multiplied by 1.2, which is equal to 96 Newton meter. So number 4, figure 4.1 shows a cooled plastic spoon that has just been placed in a hot liquid in a cup. Here is the figure 4.1, and here is a hot liquid in this cup, in which we place a cooled plastic spoon. Part A, describe in terms of molecules why the temperature of the whole of the spoon increases. So first of all, temperature is the measure of average kinetic energy of the object. When we increase the kinetic energy of the object, then its temperature increases. It means that by increasing temperature, the motion of particles increases. They move very fast. So here is the spoon and also the molecules of this liquid. The molecules of the hard liquid collide with the surface of spoon and then transfer energy to their molecules. So these are the molecules that colliding with the surface of the spoon, and the spoon also have molecules. So these molecules transfer their energy to the molecules of the spoon. So the vibration of the spoon molecules increases because they gain energy, and when the vibration increases, temperature of the whole spoon increases. So I just write here molecules of the hot liquid collide with surface of spoon as a result there will be the transfer of energy. So transferring energy to their molecules. As a result, the vibration of the spoon's molecule increases. And hence the temperature of whole spoon increases. Part B. The plastic spoon is replaced by a metal spoon. So first of all, it's the plastic spoon. Now we have replaced it with metal spoon. Describe an additional process by which the temperature of the whole of the spoon increases. So first of all, here is a metal spoon. We know that there are large number of free electrons inside a metal. So when the molecules of the hard liquid collide with the surface of the metal spoon, then also transfer energy to the free electrons in the spoon. So these free electrons move throughout the metal, due to which the temperature of the spoon increases. I write here molecules of the hot liquid also transfer energy to the free electron in spoon. These free electrons move through metal. As a result, the temperature of the whole of the spoon increases. Part C. The cup contains 150 gram of liquid of specific heat capacity 4.2 joule per gram per degree C. When the cooled spoon is placed into the hot liquid, the temperature of liquid decreases from 18 degrees C to 56 degrees C. So here is the decrease in temperature. Calculate the loss of thermal energy from the liquid. Here we have to calculate the thermal energy that is lost. So we know that energy E is equal to mc delta T. M is mass, C is specific heat capacity, and delta T is change in temperature. So we have to find out the value of this energy. So the mass is given 150 gram multiplied by C, that is 4.2. We can see here the unit of mass is gram, and here it is also gram. That's why we don't convert this gram into kilogram. Both are same units in specific heat capacity and mass. Multiply by change in temperature, that is 56, that is final temperature, minus 80 initial temperature. So that the energy comes to be minus 15,000 joule. Or I can write it as minus 15 kilojoule. So this minus basically shows that the energy is lost. That's why I have to write here energy loss and ignore minus sign. It will be 15 kilojoule. Question number 5, part A. Figure 5.1 shows the apparatus used to observe the motion of smoke particles that are in air in a box. So here is a figure 5.1 and this microscope is used to observe the smoke particles motion. Light from a lamp enters the box through a window in one side of the box. So the light from left to right is entering into the box. The smoke particles are observed using a microscope fixed above a window in the top of box. So here is a microscope that is above this box and it is used to observe the motion of these particles. Part 1. The motion of a single smoke particle is observed through the microscope. In the circle shown, sketch the path of this smoke particle. So first of all, the motion of this smoke particle is Brownian. It moves randomly in all the direction. So when we draw its motion in this circle, it will be just like this. In all direction, I just have to draw the lines. So this is the basically motion of the smoke particle because it moves randomly in all the direction. So their motion will be zigzag. Part 2. Explain why the smoke particles follow the path that is observed. Because the air molecules move in random direction and they collide with the smoke particles and these particle causes change in their direction. That's why they undergoes Brownian motion. So I write here air molecules move in random direction which collide with smoke particles. These particles causes a change in their direction. Particles cause change in their direction. Then they undergo Brownian motion. Brownian motion is just a random motion. The particles can move in any direction. Going towards the next part B. A tennis player is practicing by hitting a ball many times against a wall. The ball hits the wall 20 times in 60 seconds. The average change in momentum for each collision with the wall is 4.2 kg meter per second. Calculate the average force that the ball exerts on the wall. So here we have to find out the total average force. For that, the average change in momentum is given. I write here delta P, that is change in momentum, and we know that this momentum is the product of mass and change in speed. It is m, and delta V, it is equal to 4.2 kilogram meter per second, and total time is given 60 seconds. Second one, the ball hits the wall 20 times. So that 20 times the ball hits the wall. Here we have to calculate force. And we know that impulse, that is represented by I, it is the product of force and time. And we know that this force is equal to ma according to second law of Newton. So acceleration is actually change in velocity, that is delta V multiplied by t over t. So this t cancels by this and impulse becomes as m delta V. We can simply say that impulse is equal to change in momentum. So I write here I, that is impulse, is equal to change in momentum, and here we have to find out the value of force. That's why I write here F cross t, that is impulse, it will be equal to delta P, and this force comes to be delta P over time. So delta P given as 4.2 and time is 60 seconds. And there is also 20, that is ball hits the wall 20 times. So I multiply it with 20. So that the average force comes to be 1.4 Newton. I write here average force is equal to 1.4 Newton. Question number 6, part A. Figure 6.1 represents the electromagnetic spectrum. Here is the figure 6.1 and we can see that it's an electromagnetic spectrum. It consists of radio waves, microwaves, A, visible light, B, C and D. These are also regions. State the radiation in each of the regions represented by A, B, C and D in figure 6.1. For that we need to know about the electromagnetic spectrum, the order of frequency and wavelength. So radio wave has the smallest frequency and this D has longest frequency. It means that when we go from left to right, frequency increases. So first of all, here is radio wave and second is microwave. A is actually infrared radiation. So I write here infrared. And between this, here is a visible light and B actually represents ultraviolet light. And C is X-rays, while D is gamma rays. Gamma rays has the longest frequency, that's why it is the more energetic among all of these. So I write here A is infrared, B is ultraviolet, and C is X-rays, while D is gamma rays. Going towards the next part of this question. Part B. A source emits visible light. Figure 6.2 shows a ray of red light from the source incident on the face XY of the glass prism at point S. So first of all, in figure 6.1 we can see that there is a prism and a ray of red light is incident on this prism at point S. So this is the point S and this light is incident on face XY. This is X and this is Y. The angle of incidence I of the ray is 35. The refractive index of the glass for the red light is 1.5. Calculate the angle of refraction in the glass at S. So here we have to find out the angle of refraction. So here we use the relation that refractive index is the ratio of sine of angle of incidence to sine of angle of refraction. So I write here n is equal to sine of I over sine of r. Here I is the angle of incidence and r is the angle of refraction. So n is the refractive index and here we have to find out the angle of refraction. So I rearrange this. Sine of r will be equal to sine of angle of incidence over n and r will be equal to sine inverse of sine of angle of incidence over n. So that sine inverse sine of 35 degree divided by n is 1.5. So that the angle of refraction comes to be 22 degree. So the angle of refraction is equal to 22 degree. Part 2. On figure 6.2, draw the refracted ray at face XY and the ray emerging from face XZ of the prism. Label this ray R. So going back to figure 6.2, here we have to draw the path of this red light when it passing through the prism and comes out of prism. So first of all, outside is a rare medium while the prism is a denser medium because prism has large density. So when a ray of light goes from rare to denser medium, it bends towards normal. But when the ray of light goes from denser to rare medium, it bends away from normal. So this is a red light that is incident on the XY face. So I will again redraw it. This is a red light. And as it enters in a denser medium, so this line that is dotted is actually the normal line. So the red light will bend towards the normal. So I am going to draw its path. It will be just like this. So we can see that here I is the angle of incidence and this R is the angle of refraction. So we can observe that angle of incidence is larger than angle of refraction. It means that this ray is bent toward the normal. Secondly, we also have to find out its path when it comes out of the prism. So first of all, for that I draw a normal ray at the surface. So it is the normal ray. Now we can see that this ray is coming from denser to rare medium, so it will bend away from the normal. I am going to draw it. So this is angle of incidence for this ray, and this angle is angle of refraction. So here angle of incidence is smaller than angle of refraction, so we can say that this ray bends away from normal. So this is a complete path of this ray. Part 3. A ray of blue light follows the same path as the red light incident on the face XY. On figure 6.2, draw the path of this ray in the prism and emerging from the prism. Label this with B. So going back to the figure, now we have considered that this incoming ray is blue, and then we have to find its path inside the prism and outside of prism. So first of all, I raise something here. Now I am going to draw the path for blue light. We can see here that red light and blue light. Red light has longer wavelength and blue light has shortest wavelength. So the bending in case of blue will be larger. Here will be more bending. So when this ray falls on the boundary XY, I am going to draw this. This ray is actually the blue ray. Consider this as a blue light. Note this also refract, but here bending will be more as compared to red because the blue light has shorter wavelength. This is its path. Now I draw normal at this position again. And this ray will comes out and will bend away from this normal. It will be just like this. So this is the emerging ray. Now I am going to erase all the normal rays. So this is a complete path for these rays, and we have to label this with R and this with B. Question number 7, part A. The speed of light wave in air is 3.00 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. The refractive index of water is 1.33. Calculate the speed of light wave in water. Here the speed of light wave in air is given, and we have to find out the speed of light wave in water, that is any medium. So we also know that the definition of refractive index, as the refractive index is represented by n will be equal to C over n. We can simply say that the refractive index is the ratio of speed of light wave in air to speed of light wave in any medium. In this case, the medium is water. So here C is 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second, and we have to find out. So V will be equal to C over n, and C is given 3.00 into 10 to the power 8, and the value of n is 1.33. So that V comes to be 2.3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. So this is a value of speed of light wave in water. I write here it is 2.3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. Part B. Figure 7.1 shows parallel wavefronts of light wave in air incident on a boundary with transparent plastic. So here is the figure 7.1. On figure 7.1 part 1, draw the position of the 4 refracted wavefront in the plastic. Here we have to draw the 4 refracted wavefronts. So going back to the diagram, these wavefronts are incident on the boundary, and when they enter into the transparent plastic, they get refracted. We have to draw their path. For that, first of all, we draw the normal on these wavefront. So I am going to draw the normal using the ruler. Normal line is any line that is perpendicular to surface. Now I have drawn all the normal line. So I have to draw the refracted ray. For that we can see that the rays enter from air into the transparent material. So there will be more bending. And all of these, they bend in such a way that the angle of refraction is smaller as compared to angle of incidence. So this is basically the angle of incidence. Angle of incidence is the angle that the incident ray make with the normal line. And now we have to draw the refracted ray. Again I use the ruler, and we can see that this ray will be bent in such a way that bending will be larger. So this is the refracted ray. And all of these refracted rays must be parallel to each other. So these are coming from air into transparent plastic. Second part, draw an arrow to show the direction of travel of refracted wave. Here we have to show in which direction the refracted wave travel. So going back to the diagram, we can see that these are the incident wavefront, and this is the direction of travel of the light wave, that is incident. So we can see here it is perpendicular to the wavefront. So the direction of the travel of refracted wavefronts will be perpendicular to these lines. So I am going to draw these. It will be in this direction. Part 3. Label the angle of refraction R of the light wave. Here we have to label the angle of refraction. So angle of refraction is basically the angle between the refracted ray and normal ray. This angle is basically the angle of refraction, and I represent it with R. You can see here that the angle of refraction is number 8, part A. The lamp of car headlight is rated 12 volt and 50 watts. Calculate the current in the lamp when operating normally. Here we have to find out the value of current when potential difference and power is given. So we know that power is the product of current and potential difference. I write here power is equal to current multiply by potential difference. Here we have to find out the value of current. So I write here P is equal to IV and I will be equal to P over V. So power here is given 50 watt. It will be 50 divided by potential difference is 12 volt. So the value of current comes to be 4.2 amperes. I write here current is equal to 4.2 ampere. Part B. A car is driven at night. In a journey, the total charge that passes through the 12 volt battery is 270 kilocoulomb. Here again the potential difference is given and the charge is 270 kilocoulomb. Part 1. Calculate the electrical energy transferred. Here we have to find out the value of electrical energy. So we know that energy, that is electrical energy, is the product of charge and potential difference. Here total charge is 270 kilocoulomb. We have to convert this charge into coulombs. It becomes as 270 into 10 to the power 3 coulomb. So I write here Q is equal to 270 multiplied by 10 to the power 3 and potential difference is given 12 volt. So the value of energy comes to be 3.2 into 10 to the power 6 joule, and it may be written as 3.2 into 10 to the power 3 again 10 to the power 3 joule. 10 to the power 3 is actually kilo, so I write it as 3.2 into 10 to the power 3 kilojoule, and when I multiply 3.2 with 10 to the power 3 it becomes 3200 kilojoule. So that energy will be equal to 3200 kilojoule. Part 3. The fuel used by the car provides 3.6 into 10 to the power 4 joule per cubic centimeter. Calculate the volume of fuel used to provide the energy calculated in B part 1. So here we can see that we have to find out the volume that is used by the fuel. So it will be equal to volume of fuel used. This value, that is 3.2 into 10 to the power 6, and this is the energy, so its unit is joule, divided by this value, that is joule per cubic centimeter. 3.6 into 10 to the power, this is 6, and it is 4 joule per cubic centimeter. So this joule cancels by this and this cubic centimeter comes here, and when we simplify it, it comes to be 90 cubic centimeter. So that the volume is equal to 90 cubic centimeter. This is the volume of the fuel used. Question number 9. Figure 9.1 shows current potential difference graph for resistor and for a lamp. So here is a figure 9.1 and it is current potential difference graph. Current is measured in ampere and it is taken along y-axis, while the potential difference is measured in volt and it is taken along x-axis. Part A. The potential difference, that is PD, applied to the resistor is increased. It means that we have to increase the value of potential of resistor. Tick the box that indicates the effect on the resistance of resistor. So going back to the graph, we can see that this straight line is the curve for resistor, and it shows that when we increase the potential difference, current also increases, and when we decrease the potential difference, current also decreases. And when I find out the slope between these 2 points, so first of all I find out the slope between 2 points, its value remains constant. So at this point, potential is 6, and at the first point, potential is 4. While at this point, the current is 4, and at this point, the current is 2.6. So when I have to find out the slope for this, I write here slope is equal to AB, because we have take 2 points. So I write here just on y-axis, here is current 4 minus 2.6 divided by 6.0 minus 4.0. So it comes to be 1.4 divided by 2.0. And when I divide this, it comes to be 0.7. So the slope of this is equal to 0.7, and it simply shows that when I increase the potential difference, current also increase, and in between any 2 points, when I find out the slope, its value remains same. So the resistance is constant, that is according to Ohm's law. Potential difference is directly proportional to current, and when I remove this sign of proportionality, it comes to be R and I. So this R is basically resistance, and here resistance remain constant in the case of resistor because the graph between the current and potential difference is a straight line. So I write here resistance increase, resistance is constant, or resistance decrease. So in the case of resistor, the resistance remain constant. I tick the second box. Part 2. The potential difference TD applied to the lamp is increased. Tick the box that indicates the effect on the resistance of the lamp. So here we have to describe the effect on the resistance of the lamp when potential difference is increased. Either it increased, decreased, or remains constant. So going back to the graph, we can see that the second curve is actually for the lamp, and we can see that this is gradually decreasing curve. So it means that the resistance of lamp increase. So I write here the resistance of lamp increases. Part B. The potential difference across the lamp is 6.0 volt. Calculate the resistance of the lamp. Here potential difference is given, that is 6 volt, and we have to find out the resistance of lamp. So we know that V is equal to IR, that is according to Ohm's law. In order to find out resistance, we have to know the value of potential difference and current. So R comes to be V over I, and potential is given 6.0 divided by, we don't know the value of current. So going back to the graph, we find out the value of current at 6.0 volt in the case of lamp. So here is 6.0 volt, and at this point it meets the lamp curve. So I join this point on the y-axis and find its corresponding value of current. So at this point we get the value of current in the case of lamp, and it comes to be 4.4, and it is in amperes. So I write here current is 4.4. So the total resistance of the lamp comes to be 1.4 ohms. I write here resistance is equal to 1.4 ohms. Going towards the next part, part C. The lamp and resistors are connected in parallel to 6.0 volt supply. Calculate the current from the supply. Here resistor and the lamp both are connected in parallel to a 6.0 volt supply. So if I consider that, it's a lamp and it is connected in parallel with resistor. And both of these are connected with power supply. It is power supply, that is 6.0 volt, and this is lamp, while this is resistor. So the lamp and the resistor are connected in parallel and both of these are connected with 6.0 volt power supply. So we have to find out the value of current. For that we have to know the series and parallel combination, that which quantity remains same and which changes. So I write here series and parallel. And here I write potential difference and current. So in the series, potential difference changes while current remains same. And in parallel, potential difference remains same while the value of current changes. So here we can see that both of these are in parallel combination and we have to find out the value of current. In the parallel combination, the value of current changes. It means that the total current is obtained by adding the current of all components. So that here we have to find out the value of current. Current from the supply, it will be equal to the current that is passing through the lamp plus the current that is passing through the resistor. So here potential is given 6.0 volt but current is not given. So first of all we go back to the graph and find out the corresponding values of current. So here we already see that at 6 volt the value of current for lamp is 4.4 ampere while for the resistor it is 4.0. So I write here the value of current for resistor is 4.0 while for lamp it is 4.4 and the unit is ampere. So we have add both of these current to find out the total current. It will be equal to 4.4 plus 4.0. So it comes to be 8.4 and it is measured in ampere. So this is the value of total current. Part D. The lamp and the resistors are connected in series to another power supply. Now both of these are connected in series. The current in the circuit is 4.0 ampere. Calculate the total potential difference across the lamp and resistor. Here we have to find out the value of potential difference. So here we can see that when both of these are in series combination, so the value of potential difference changes. It means that the total potential difference is obtained by adding the potential difference across all of the components. So here the value of current is given, that is 4.0 ampere. So at 4.0 ampere, the value of potential difference for resistor and lamp. So it is 4.0. This meet resistor curve at 6.0. So I write here the potential difference of resistor is 6.0 volt while this meet the lamp curve at this point and it is almost 4.9. So the value of potential difference for lamp is 4.9 volt. So I write here the total potential difference V is equal to VR plus V lamp. So the resistor has total potential difference of 6.0 and for lamp it is 4.9. So the value of total potential difference comes to be 10.9 volt. So I write here potential difference is equal to 10.9 volt. Question number 10 part A. Figure 10.1 shows a straight wire AB placed in magnetic field between the poles of the magnet. The ends of AB, that is wire, are connected to galvanometer. So here in figure 10.1 we can see that it's a wire that is represented by AB and this wire is connected with the galvanometer that is here. When AB is moved vertically, when we move it vertically, the needle of the galvanometer shows a deflection. State 3 factors that affect the size of deflection. So here we can change the deflection by the strength of magnetic field, and if we increase the strength of magnetic field or decrease the strength of magnetic field, then there will be the deflection change on the galvanometer. Second, when we move this wire very fast, or we can simply say that when we change its speed, then the deflection on galvanometer also be changes. And third one is that when the length of the wire AB that is placed in the magnetic field is changed. When we change the length of this wire, then the deflection on galvanometer also be affected. So I write here, first of all, strength of magnetic field. Second, speed of movement of the wire. That is AB, and length of the wire AB. That is placed in a magnetic field. Part B. Figure 10.2 shows a transformer. Here is the figure 10.2 and it's a transformer. It has two coils, primary that is represented by P and secondary that is represented by S. Here on the primary side the voltage is 240 volt and on the secondary side the voltage is 12 volt. The primary coil P has 8000 turns and an input of 240 volt. The secondary coil S has an output of 12 volt. Calculate the number of turns in secondary coil. Here we have to find out the total number of turns in secondary coil. So first of all I write that Ns over Np is equal to Vs over Vp. It means that the turn ratio of secondary to primary is equal to the potential difference ratio between secondary to primary. So here we have to find out the value of secondary. Number of turns I write here Ns. We have to find out the value of Ns. It will be equal to Vs over Vp multiplied by Np. So Vs, that is the voltage of secondary, that is output voltage, it is given 12 volt. So it will be equal to 12 divided by primary voltage is 240 multiplied by number of turns in primary, that is equal to 8000. So it is the number of turns are secondary and it comes to be 400. So number will be equal to 400 turns. That is on the secondary coil. So going towards the next part. Part 2. A circuit containing a resistor is connected to the terminal A and B. A direct current, that is DC, is required in this resistor. On figure 10.2, draw this circuit. So here we have to draw the circuit that contains a resistor and direct current is required for this resistor. First of all, you consider two terminals A and B. So these are the two terminals A and B. And in order to measure current, that is direct current, we have to attach galvanometer, because galvanometer is a device that is used to measure current. So again, using ruler, I attach galvanometer here. This galvanometer is basically used to measure current. So it's a galvanometer, and AC current is changes into DC current by using diode, and there is also a resistor. So I also attach resistor here and also diode that is used to convert the alternating current into direct current. So here is first of all resistor and diode. This is resistor and diode is also connected here. So this is a complete circuit. This is resistor R and here is diode. It is used to convert the alternating current into the direct current, and this galvanometer is used to measure current. Question number 11, part A. To ensure the safety of workers in laboratories where radioactive sources are used, describe how radioactive materials, part first, should be stored. So first of all, we have to know about the radioactive materials. These are the materials that contain radioactive elements inside them, and these emit the radiation that is very dangerous to all humans. So first of all, radioactive materials emits alpha particle, beta particle and gamma rays. All of these are radioactive. Here gamma is the most penetrating, but it cannot penetrate through the lead sheet. So we store the radioactive material in a box that is made from lead sheet. So I write here, we store the radioactive materials in a box with lead walls. Part 2 should be handled. So how we can handle the radioactive materials, as these are very dangerous to all humans. So we can handle them with long tongues, and we can also handle them by wearing lead gloves. So I write here, handle with long tongues. And second one, we can handle the radioactive materials by wearing lead gloves. By wearing lead gloves. Part B. Complete the table below for 3 types of emission from the radioactive sources. So first of all, here is type of emission. Second one is nature, range in air and absorbed by. So basically we have 3 types of radiation. I write here alpha particles, beta particles and gamma radiation. We have to know about all of these. So first of all, here is alpha radiation. Alpha radiations are helium nuclei and it is positively charged. I write here it is helium nuclei with atomic number 2 and mass number 4. Second one is beta radiation. Beta radiation is just like electron and it is negatively charged. Third one is gamma rays. Gamma rays are very energetic and these are neutral, and these are just like electromagnetic radiation, move with the speed of light. So I write here it's electromagnetic radiation. Accordingly, we have to fill the table. First of all, in a table, there is electromagnetic radiation. So, which radiation is just like the electromagnetic radiation? It is gamma rays. So, I write here gamma rays. Second one is helium nucleus. So, we can see from here that alpha radiations are just like helium nucleus. So, I write here these are alpha radiation. And last one is electron. So electrons are negatively charged and beta radiations are just like electrons. So I write here these are beta radiation. Next is range in air. So gamma rays travels in air several kilometers. We also have to describe the range of alpha radiation and beta radiation. So first of all, alpha radiation travels few centimeter in air. I write here a few centimeter, or it is up to 10 centimeter. Next is beta radiation. They travel few meters or up to 10 meters. And next these are absorbed by. Gamma radiations are very energetic and these are absorbed by lead sheet. So I write here thick lead or 30 centimeter lead. It is given that the alpha radiations are absorbed by 0.2 millimeter paper, while the beta radiations are absorbed by thin aluminium sheet or 2 millimeter aluminium. Next, part C. State the type of radiation emitted when. Part 1. An immersion nucleus AM, whose atomic number is 95 and mass number is 241, decays into Neptunium nucleus, whose atomic number is 93 and mass number is 273. So which kind of radiation is emitted during this decay? I write here AM 241 and 95. It changes into NP. It is 237 and 93. So first of all, we have to check that atomic number and atomic mass change. So here we can see that first of all atomic number is 95 and mass number is 241. Then atomic number changes and it becomes 93. It means that the atomic number decreased by 2. I write here atomic number decrease by 2. Now we look at the mass number. It is 241 while it is 237. It means that mass number decreased by 4. So the element whose atomic number is 2 and mass number is 4 is actually helium. So I write here helium 4 and 2. So when I write this, we can see that it's a balanced equation. So I write here it's alpha particle. Second part, a phosphorus nucleus whose atomic number is 15 and mass number is 32 decays into silicon nucleus whose atomic number is 16 and mass number 32. So here we also have to tell that which kind of radiation is emitted. So I again write here phosphorus 32 and 15 and it changes into silicon 32 and 16 plus. So first of all we again check atomic number and atomic mass. Here atomic number is 15 and here it is 16. It means that atomic number increased by 1. Now we check the mass number. It is 32 and it is also 32. It means that the mass number remains same. So I write here mass number remains same. So the element whose atomic number is 1 and mass number remains same. It is just like electron. I write here it is electron. It is 0 and minus 1. So we can simply say that the beta particles emit here. It is beta radiation. When phosphorus nucleus changes into silicon nucleus, it emits beta radiation.